Hello and welcome. We wanted to go over a brief history of the Republic and philosophical political ideologies that have helped shape contemporary politics. We hope you enjoy. The Republic is said, based on tradition, to have been created after a revolution, led by an aristocratic Roman native, L. Junius Brutus, expelling an Etruscan king, Tarquin the Proud. Tarquinius Superbus, believed to be around 509 BCE. By the time of 363 BCE, two consuls, executives that were elected annually, were given the right of imperium, or absolute power, which they used to construct the law, use religion to govern the citizens, and proclaim their preservation of traditions. Wealthy landowners controlled armies and craved power. These consuls consisted of two chambers, the Centuriate Assembly and the Senate. The Centuriate Assembly was controlled by the nobility, claimed to be the popular vote, but any law they wish to pass would need to be approved by the Senate. Senators had lifelong terms, most were former magistrates. The Senate never developed any laws, its main function was advising public finance and enacting foreign policy. But both consuls had supreme authority in the Roman constitution. They were also judges, military commanders, and lobbyists. Agriculture was the first major shock to the system of the Republic. During 133 BCE, self-proclaimed land reformer Tiberius Gracchus, considering a second term, proposed solutions of moderation that were ignored by the upper class. He wanted to section off certain amounts of state property and give what land was left over to the poor. He was eventually murdered by fanatical senators and families who believed his new laws restricted their ownership of property and their political power. The Senate used this to win over the lower class, but in actuality it was only a few hundred wealthy landowners who suffered, not the state. This lends credibility to historic motivation. By controlling public assets, the Senate eliminates any threat to their self-preservation, and more importantly their right to wealth and property. Cicero, 106–43 BCE. Aristocrat, statesman, and philosopher, despised tyranny. Although, at one point in time Cicero did agree that to prevent further collapse a dictator would be a safe alternative, he usually took the position of anti-tyrant. In 63 BCE, he gave the Catilinarian speeches, after he discovered a conspiracy, a plot of armed revolution from citizens seeking debt consolidation, known as the Conspiracy of Catiline, which he used to persuade the Senate to pass the Seu, Senatus Consultum Ultimum. When he was not debating how a strong man could rule without becoming a tyrant, he was preaching republicanism, citizenship, and liberty. He brought Stoicism, a Hellenistic philosophy, to Rome. He urged the upper class to be virtuous in dealing with the common man, the high morality of Stoicism, but alas, he was ignored also. So, this philosophy of preserving the traditions of the people, being their voice, to oppose dictatorship because dictators are only concerned with their own interests, is starting to seem a little hypocritical. It is only ironic that the Republic decays under the Senate's own self-interest. The Social War, 91–88 BCE, which was a direct result of the Senate, began an authority dispute between two commanders, Marius and Sulla. Sulla captures the capital and Marius dies in battle. Sulla then terrorizes Roman citizens, putting a lot of them in prison because of their opposition. After capturing the capital, Sulla then decides to protect Rome from further military occupations. He reduces military power of governors and also reinstates the Senate's right to veto the assembly. Sulla puts into legislation a bill that counteracts against the same measures he used to acquire power. He also plants a few senators into consul that will argue and legislate in his favor. The fall of the Roman Republic begins between the years 70 to 31 BCE. The Senate did have power to appoint a dictator, giving him imperium, but with a reign of only 6 months. During the threat of piracy and innumerable revolts, the Senate decides to elect Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey the Great, for a 3-year term. After his triumphs, between 62 to 61 BCE, Pompey disbands his army and celebrates. Porcius Cato, leading the Senate, neglected to establish his eastern settlements and opposed and successfully blocked a land bill that would offer Pompey's veterans property in the provinces. Pompey and another consul, Licinius Crassus, tried to further their positions of influence and political power in Rome. They both tried to remove Sulla's reformations, and the Senate grew anxious about Pompey's rise of popularity. 60 BCE. The first triumvirate formed a political alliance with Crassus and a beloved man of the people, Julius Caesar. These 3 men conspire to overthrow the Republic to ultimately liberate the state and its citizens. Just 1 year later, in 59 BCE, while Caesar was consul, he passed the land bill for Pompey, giving the land of the eastern colonies back to Pompey. He was already becoming a thorn into the side of the rich politicians of the Republic. Beneath the talk and rhetoric of the Republicans, they were no more moral than the tyrants they seemed to try and abolish. Driven by their own political desires and control of wealth and property, they were no more than just barbarians with public bathtubs. It seems that when this system was threatened, the only way to alleviate tension or re-establish their position was with using violence and murder. They rely on the fear of a dictator to keep their entitlements and never put in perspective that one tyrannical madman is nothing compared to 900 tyrannical madmen. There are a couple of cases, either through reformation or revolution, the Senate eliminates any and all threats. We can also see some motivation to this also, controlling wealth and land. That was an abridged history of the Republic, now to Enlightenment thinkers. Thomas Hobbes. In the nature of man there are 3 principal causes of quarrel. First, competition, invade for gain. Second, diffidence, invade for safety. Third, glory, invade for reputation. The first cause of quarrel use violence to make themselves masters of other persons, wives, children, cattle. The second cause to defend them. The third is caused by trifles, a word, different opinion, any other sign of undervalue. When men live without a common power they are in a condition which is called war, and such a war, as is of every man, against every man. And whereas some men have pretended for their disobedience to their sovereign, a new covenant, made not with men but with God. This is also unjust. There is no covenant with God but by mediation of somebody that represent God's person, which none doth but God's lieutenant, who hath the sovereignty under God. But this pretense of covenant with God is so evident a lie, even in the pretender's own consciences, that is not only an act of an unjust, but also of a vile and unmanly disposition. Thomas Hobbes. One assembly of men that may reduce all their wills by plurality of voices unto one will, unity of them. All of them in one and the same person, made by covenant of every man with every man. Or as Hobbes states, I authorize and give up my right of governing myself to this man or assembly of men, on this condition, that thou give up thy right to him, and authorize all his actions in like manner. The multitude of the united into one person is called a commonwealth. Being bound by covenant, cannot lawfully make a new covenant amongst themselves, to be obedient to any other in anything whatsoever without his permission. And in him consisted the essence of the commonwealth, which to define it is one person of whose acts a great multitude, by mutual covenants with one another, have made themselves every one the author. To the end he may use the strength and means of them all as he shall think expedient, for their peace and common defense. He that carrieth this person is called sovereign, and every one besides, his subjects. John Locke. A state of nature is one with no common appeal and only private judgment. A political or civil society that one man has entered and has quitted his power to punish offenses against the law of nature. Resigning executive power to the public. Setting up a judge on earth with authority to determine all controversies and redress injuries that may happen to any member of the Commonwealth. Preserve his property, life, liberty, and estate against injuries and attempts of other men. No political party can be, or subsist, without having in itself the power to preserve property and in order thereunto punish the offenses of all those of that society. Every one having quitted his natural powers, resigned into the hands of the community. Men authorized by this community for their execution, decide all the differences that may happen between any members of that society concerning any matter of right, and punishes those offenses which any member hath committed against that society with such penalties as the law has established. Evident that absolute monarchy, by some men counted for the only government in the world, is inconsistent with civil society. Civil society is being able to avoid and remedy inconveniencies of the state of nature. Every man being judge in his own case by setting up known authority anyone can appeal to. Whenever any person have no such authority to appeal to and decide any difference between them are still in a state of nature. So is every absolute prince in respect to those who are under his dominion. He has both legislative and executive power in himself alone, no judge, no appeal lies open. I suppose during his time, the English did not have rights. Men, such as Locke, would not have been able to voice an opinion regarding restricting monarchical power. It undermines the authority of a monarch as someone were to insist that the king exists only in a state of nature by controlling those under his dominion. In many such cases, these types of questioning authority and creating a new system that can be relevant to all people would be considered heretical or treasonous. In the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx states that old powers wish to exercise the new specter of communism. 1. Communism is already acknowledged by all European powers to be itself a power. 2. It is high time that communists should openly, in the face of the whole world, publish their views, their aims, their tendencies, and meet this nursery with the specter of communism with a manifesto of the party itself. Now, I agree with Marx, that history of existing societies is the history of class struggles. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman, in a world. Oppressor and oppressed, stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight, a fight that each time ended either in revolutionary reconstruction of society at large, or in common ruin of contending classes. Which that all of history is condensed with conflicting struggle of classes, either lower, poor classes trying to exercise their autonomy against oppression, or higher, rich classes trying to keep the poor class subjugated within society. Marx continues that epochs of history have evidence of complicated arrangements of society into various orders, manifold gradation of social rank. In Roman society, patricians, knights, plebeians, slaves. In the Middle Age society, feudal lords, vassals, guildmasters, journeymen, apprentices, serfs, all of which are subordinate gradations of society. Modern bourgeois society sprouted from the ruins of feudal society not by eradicating class antagonisms, but established new classes, new conditions, new struggles. The bourgeois simplified class antagonisms. Society as a whole is more and more splitting into two great hostile camps, into two classes, bourgeoisie and proletariat. Burghers were the first elements that developed the bourgeoisie. Increase in means of exchange and in commodities, gave commerce to navigate industry, the revolutionary element in the tottering of feudal society in rapid development. Feudal system of industry and industrial production was monopolized by guilds, no longer sufficed for the wants of the new markets. Manufacturing systems developed, middle-class division of labor between different corporate guilds vanished in the face of the division of labor in each single workshop. Markets kept growing, demand rising. Steam and machinery revolutionized industry. Manufacture was taken by modern industry, the industrial middle class, industrial millionaires, leaders of industrial armies, modern bourgeois. Modern industry established world markets. Much as industry, travel and commerce extended, so did the rich. I do not, however, agree that private property should be abolished, and all property belong to the state. We lose power and rights by having government control our property, and would seem meaningless to work toward obtaining property if the state is willing and able to take it away. But Marx claims, capital is not private but a social power. Capital is converted to common property to all members of society. Personal property is not a social property but only the social characteristic of that property that has changed, it loses its class character. The sources for this presentation were provided